why should these two parties that have let the country down time after time, decade after decade, frankly, have sold our birthright for as many bowls of pottage they can stick into their private mansions, then why shouldn't a different voice come up and replace them and speak for the people of this country? There's no good reason.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by Gawain Towler, former head of communications for UKIP, the Brexit Party, and then Reform. Gawain, you joined us today. How would you sort of summarise your career? Give us a bit of a potted biography of it.
Fun, I think, in one word. It's been a great deal of fun. I mean, a group of people over a period of time, but one person in particular, has given me just about as much money to live on, and my prime purpose is to cause as much trouble as I can for the government of the day. And this counts as a job. I think there are millions of people in this country who would leap at the opportunity. It's been a pleasure, an honour, and a great ride. I mean, we start from nowhere, we achieve great things, we disappear back in our own hole, we pop up again. We are the whack-a-mole of British politics. And sometimes the bruises show, and sometimes the grin show. It's been fun.
And it was about 20 years ago you started. Were you working for the Tories at the time?
I had been, but I had resigned from the Tories over... I went to Brussels in 1999, partially to discover what it was all about. I was a gut Eurosceptic, but I hadn't a clue what I was talking about. And I had the opportunity after the 99 Euros, where I'd run somebody's campaign, Nudge Diva. He offered me a job in London, or he offered a job in Brussels. And I thought, well, I'm a Eurosceptic. What does that mean? It's a gut thing, and I had no clue as to why. And so I thought, well, if I go and work in Brussels, I might have an idea as to why it is and get some factual knowledge and stuff. And after a couple of years working in the European Parliament as the Tories' international development crisis, humanitarian crises, volcanoes, floods, I'm your man, I came to the conclusion with the stuff coming across my desk that the then Conservative line, the Hague line of in Europe, not run by Europe, was patent bunk. If we're in Europe, we're run by Europe. And on balance, I decided, though there are things good about the European Union, on balance I decided that it is better to not be in than to be in. And I could no longer stand on a stage. I had stood for election for the Tories in Glasgow. I was living there a couple of times. But I could no longer honestly stand on a stage and say this is the case, because it was patently not true. If you were in the European Union, you were run by the European Union. And I could not lie.
And so UKIP was the obvious choice for you?
No, I then came to the conclusion the best thing I could do was take the mick. So I used to leak stories to the local paper, something called the European Voice. On the back page was the only page anybody ever read, which was the gossip column. And I would leak them a couple of stories a week, and they would always take the dull one. They were both quite fun, but they'd always take the less fun.
Right.
And so with a friend I knew over there, we set up a magazine called The Sprout. We created a private eye manqué for in Brasca Veritas was our slogan. And we set up this private eye style magazine in Brussels. I did that for a couple of years. I did a bit of other journalism and consultancy, and then off the back of that became the private eye correspondent in Brussels. So I was the Brussels Sprouts column for a while. And then Farage came into the pub one day and said, you take the piss, you're a Eurosceptic, you're a journalist, will you work for me? And he offered me 3 times what I was earning. And I said yes within a third of an inch of a pint, because it sounded fun. And also, the first time I met Farage was on election night in 1999.
When he gets elected.
When he first gets elected. Same day as Caroline Lucas first gets elected, in the same room. They were both South East MEPs. And so you had the start of the Green movement and start of electorally, and the start of the Eurosceptic movement electorally in the same room, same time. What was fun about that was Caroline Lucas, who's now all smart suits and terribly smart and zingy and stuff of that sort. I remember going out and having a cigarette, sitting on the steps of Winchester Town Hall, and there were 3 of her campaign team. You're only allowed about 15 people into a count, and 3 of the guys were sitting there with a vast reefer, dreadlocks down, and they were swampy. the guy that had dug himself into a hillside for 9 months to stop some bypass, the Winchester bypass. But this was the sort of people who were that close to the Caroline Lucas Green campaign then.
Wow.
She got rid of them in seconds. She's now the professionalism and all the rest of it, shiny suits and so on and so forth. The Green Party, those people who got her elected were dropped very quickly. But anyhow, I met him then. He seemed to be my sort of chap, but I was a Tory. I'd stood for the Tories and so on and so forth. But it was, as I say, after a couple of years of being a freelance, he came to me and asked me to do that. And so I did. Entertainingly, that was sort of November after the Robert Kilroy Silk period, and he'd already resigned and gone off in a huff at a sort of a Tugendtan puff of stuff. But he'd disappeared. And then that was November, starting work in January. And over Christmas, I'd bumped into a Eurocrat friend who had worked with the new commission coming in. And this was the commission of Mr. Barroso. And he said, great. He took, literally, for my first day, I walked into the European Parliament, very first day at work. I'm walking down this corridor and I grabbed my shoulder and dragged him into an empty office. And it was this chap who I knew. He said he'd been fired as one of the cabinet of Barroso. He said, Gawain, you must ask a question. What? He said, where did they go on holiday in the summer? Ask Mr. Barroso where he'd gone on holiday in the summer. So that morning, my first day at work, I put a parliamentary question in. Where did Mr. Barroso go on holiday in the summer? Fine. And about a week later, ping back, you cannot ask that question. You have to ask the commission. You cannot ask a commissioner. You cannot single out a single minister, a single commissioner. So, okay, all 22 commissioners. Where did you go on holiday? And a few weeks later, the answers came back. He had been on holiday with a Greek shipping millionaire and all sorts of other things, and there were big questions about his funding and all the rest of it. But we also discovered, of course, that Peter Mandelson had been on holiday with Oleg Deripaska. Nobody had the first idea that Mandelson was off with billionaires sailing around the Adriatic and the Mediterranean. So we were able to pull both of those, and off the back of that, there was a motion of no confidence in the commission, and all sorts kicked off. And that was my very first day in the office. It was, this is fun. what jollity. But the way that Farage is, not only his broad politics on the big ticket stuff of our relationship with the European Union, our relationship with ourselves, that the sovereignty aspect, but also his attitude towards people. Live your own life. He is a deeply liberal man, and he doesn't want to tell people how to live their lives. He's not interested in that sort of rubbish. And the stuff about the pub and the stuff about this, that, it's actually about a deep, abiding idea that, I suppose in his case and mine, an Englishman's home and his castle, an Englishman's life is his own, and the government can generally stub it out as quickly as they'd like us to stub out our bad habits. And so that broad agreement with the way Farage works made it very easy.
And how did personally you two get on as well in terms of bonding? Yeah,
same. We have a very similar worldview. It was very easy. And because Nigel's general approach is quite laissez-faire, he trusted me to crack on and do stuff. There was one glorious moment. As most politicians, there'd be the Express wanted an article or something, and we'd have a quick word, and he'd give me 4 or 5 ideas, a couple of sentences, and I'd crack on and write the piece. He'd double check it. There'd be 1 or 2 sentences he'd edit and then send it off. There was a lovely moment where the Sun commissioned something, and I phoned him up, and I'm sitting in Soho at the time, and Nigel, the Sun wanted 400 words on X. He goes, you know what, Gawain? I'll write this one myself. Cool. Great. And so I potter off and have another pint, and he phones up and laptop out and tap away. And I send it across to the Sun, and they're right back saying, yeah, it's good, but it's just not his authentic voice. Hey-ho. But since then, Nigel has been, he's much more engaged in the writing. At that point, he had so many other things to do.
Of course.
But that was the moment he switched to actually, he writes his own stuff now. But at the time, he had other things on his plate, and it was just because we were very sympathetic, it was very easy to write what he was thinking because I knew what he was thinking. And so, no, it was just a lot of fun. He very much the sort of chap who, I don't care if you're out until 4, as long as you're in at 9.
Yeah, I see.
And his experience, his formative experience of working in the city before the Big Bang, not for long, but he loved that, the open outcry system, the clubbability of things. You don't need to go to university to be successful. You don't need to have proven yourself in the way that society demands to be able to get on and do stuff that's worthwhile. He has a deep and abiding love of our history and that stuff. His collection of First World War medals. How did he meet Ashcroft? Was it in politics? No, it was buying. It was competing. Nigel can't fight with VCs, but it was that sort of interest in our history.
Or Farage's Forages as well, which is how he met Godfrey Bloom, for instance.
Indeed. And I was very lucky. He still had a little bit of time in those days when I first started working for him, and I went on a couple of them.
Wow.
And honestly, there is no. I think the first one was Richard Holmes, and so you have one great orator, and we know he is, no question about that, and the great history. But you're walking down a field, and that patch of land there, that 15 square yards, is where that VC operator took place. And then he was able to explain. He knew the Gazette, the London Gazette story. He was able to make it hugely full of life. And then you got drunk. You'd go to Ypres, at the hotel at Ypres, and
pay your respects.
Do the history, do the trenches, do all the rest, and then the city boys would go and get drunk. But it was the depth of knowledge, the depth of interest. And one of the dreams I'd always had is him to do a sort of Michael Portillo. Michael Portillo can have trains, but get Nigel to do a series of short half an hour films about certain VCs. Nobody in the country could do it better. It would be brilliant, and he would be superb at it.
GB News, it's the obvious one, isn't it?
Well,
Something like that.
I've been wanting for him to do this for 10, 15 years. I mean, but it is something that he has a deep and abiding knowledge and interest and love of that, and it does, and that the fact that he has a hinterland,
yes,
makes him slightly different from most modern politicians. You tell him about something or he reads something, but he's able to synthesize interest and knowledge that he has out with his day-to-day politics to make that story comprehensible. He's able to. He used to talk about when in the days that we were considering doing some sort of deal with the Tories, the token election and things of this sort. And he understood that. Now the problem is he could talk to 79 out of 100 Tories and they wouldn't have the first idea what he was talking about because they don't have that hinterland. They are very Johnny-come-lately. They're very shallow in their comprehension of both politics and where politics comes from. And so to that end, it was a huge pleasure. You learned stuff. I'm not ignorant. I'm not unread, but I learnt so much. And there's a myth that Farage is like a creosote bush. He kills anything within 5 feet of him. It's absolutely not true. He welcomes challenge, and I did. But let's be honest, it's 10 times that I would say you're wrong, he'd be right 9 of them. But he was happy for somebody to, and he still is happy for people to say, actually, but he has a huge, I don't know, he's obviously very good at what he does. He does have a way of feeling how the public feels, but also how things can be perceived. He's always talked about what is credible, not what is right. Policy X may be right, but right now the country's not ready for it. So there's no point in banging on about this. But I would say, for example, the net zero stuff. As a tribe, the sort of Farage, UKIP, Brexit Party, now Reform, has always been very, very sceptical of the net zero agenda, the climate change agenda, the panic, and all the rest of it. But it just wasn't worth banging on about. We'd say something every now and then, but it was not worth making a major stand on this issue because the country wasn't ready to hear it. Right now, I would say the country is beginning to be ready to hear it, and you'll hear it more and more from Reform people because it is now credible.
particularly as Labour steps up those efforts.
Chris Skidmore and all the rest of it. I'm sorry, the Tories have been stepping it up for a
Yeah,
long time.
I know, but they've got the 2030
you're quite
targets
right,
opposed to-
and so on, and the
don't
20 billion black hole under the North Sea, and all of that. But the point is we've been inwardly talking about this for an awfully long time, but we've never made a big song and dance about it politically because it just wasn't the right time. It may have been right, but it wasn't credible.
And what you had to do when you joined UKIP around sort of 2004 is that big shift, because obviously you start to see the eastern countries join and start being able to send people to this country. And so migration becomes a huge part of it. And moving away from the constitutionalist, federalist arguments perhaps of the 90s, where Maastricht was quite dry on some grounds.
There's no doubt that UKIP was very much was a academic pursuit, and a very, very limited, small, niche academic pursuit. But I remember something the glorious magnificence and somewhat, well, Godfrey Bloom, saying to me, and he would say, but the guys in Bradford, the chaps I know at the golf club, the chaps I know at the rugby club, they would say, Godfrey, you may be right, but until we feel it up Lime Grove, we're never going to vote that way. But with immigration, particularly after the enlargement and the fact that Blair specifically and deliberately opened our borders where the rest of Europe didn't for the first 7 years, suddenly it was coming up Lime Grove. And we up until that point, immigration was not really an issue. But when we saw, with the free movement of people, once you had brought in countries of vastly different economic growth and economic status and GDP, and you had free movement of people, if you've got France and Britain, similarly GDP, you have free movement of people, it doesn't make much difference. Some people come over here, some of them come over here, there, and fine. But a country like Lithuania had 1/19 of our GDP at that point. A bus driver in Britain was getting paid more than the head of a university in Lithuania. And of course, the slope goes like that. It's no longer like that. It's like that. And so therefore, it was a one-way traffic. Yes, Brits had the freedom to go and work in Vilnius.
Yeah.
But why would they? Frankly. And so that's that change. And suddenly you saw this, that since the war, there'd been an average around about 50,000, 40 to 50,000 every year. And suddenly you saw this massive dichotomy where the net numbers arriving went from tens of thousands to
six
hundreds
figures,
of thousands. And the simple fact was that was because of our membership of the European Union.
I remember you once telling me that your frustration as sort of UKIP was, for instance, you come up with a great quote and then say the Nationals would then give it to a Tory MP to say back to them.
But that was... But
when did that start to change is what I wondered. Like, when did you start to
when
know you'd
Patrick
gone...
O'Flynn convinced Richard Desmond to turn the Express into a pro-Brexit newspaper.
Remind us, what year was that?
I can't remember. But that's when it was.
Right.
The change was. I remember something happened and a journalist phoned me up for a quote. I think it was about 5 years into my job, and no journalist had ever asked me for a quote before. I had been pushing and firing and firing and firing and firing day after day, and nobody had ever phoned me for a comment.
So you've been pushing out press releases.
Yes, and phoning people up and gossiping in pubs and doing what you do. And then suddenly a journalist asked me for a comment. I couldn't believe it. It was literally 4 or 5 years into the job. So that was the moment. The moment things started to change is when O'Flynn convinced Desmond that the Express should be pro-Brexit. And that was a massive, massive moment. And I think Patrick's never been fully recognised for the vast importance that he had to the great change in our country's constitutional situation. But it was the case. And it got to the point where I'd do something and I'd send out my quotes, and they would arrive on the front page of the Mail or the Telegraph or the Times or the Guardian, and in a backbench Tory mouth. And I, as you can imagine, as a press officer, I'd phone up said journalist and be very polite and suggest it was a perfectly decent thing to do. And they would say, yes, you're quite right, Gawain, no problem at all. No, they'd say, I'm really sorry, Gawain, nothing to do with me. It's been done by the editors back home. And it got to the point where they would start to send me their copy, BCC'd, when they sent it back to London to prove that they hadn't stitched me up. But I think one of Reagan's great quotes is a man can achieve great things in this world if he doesn't demand the credit. And to me, a story on the front page of the Mail that I had given them, say, when the European Union decided that water wasn't hydrating, it didn't come under you couldn't hydrate yourself with water because that was the wrong definition of the word hydration, so therefore water, that sort of absurdity, this sort of pettifogging silliness that they came up with all the time. To my mind, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was under a UKIP MEP's name. It didn't matter if I got the credit. What mattered is the story was out there. And this was the drip, drip, drip on the marble of British public opinion that finally led to a crack. And it didn't matter because what mattered was we were getting the reality of what Brussels was in our day-to-day lives into people's heads. And the rest, well, that is what led to 2016. That is what led to that result. And it didn't, as I say, it just... I would have liked to have got my guys in the press. They would have liked me to have got their stories and their words into the press. But in the end, it didn't matter.
And what was the sort of crack moment? Because I remember, of course, 2014, you topped the European elections. It was a big moment. Obviously, there was some really impressive by-election performances around that time as well. And you get the defections. Talk us through those kind of 5 years running up to 2016 and getting that referendum over the line.
I remember the year? Don't know which one. The Barnsley by-election was a terribly important one, where we arrived there and there was a group of, I think Robert Jackson was there amongst others, but a group of Tories and all the rest of it, they're sitting there, and the smugness and that they greeted us as we arrived. And though I think we got 12% or something, we came second though, in a red wall seat. Farage had been saying this for a while. Paul Nuttall had been saying this for a while. Others had been saying it for a while. John Bickley and others had been going. Our native vote isn't, as it had been, retired half-colonels in the Weald of Kent. Our actual vote are patriotic Labour. That's the real core vote of that UKIP thing. And up until then, it's been farmers in the southwest, it had been Tunbridge Wells colonels, it had been this sort of thing. And so that result in Barnsley, where we stamped all over, the Lib Dems were on 1%. Lord Carman's son was the candidate for the Lib Dems. Terrible nice chap, actually. But the Tories, we knocked into a cocked hat. Jarvis won it, and he won it handsomely. And then Oldham. And then you started to see that we were winning council seats in places that you wouldn't expect. Hartlepool.
Hayward and Middlehurst as well.
Well, the Hayward and Middleton election
was
the same day as the Clacton by-election. So Carswell, as far as I understand, had been presented with some private polling that told him at the next general election he would lose his seat to UKIP. And so he suggested to him that might it be better not to stand as UKIP. He was well known as one of the most Eurosceptic MPs. He was part of that side of things. And more damaging to the Tory party would be a defection and a by-election than would just be us win it at the general election. And we convinced him that this was a good thing to do. We also made a promise that we would support him financially in the election to the extent that he needed. And so on the same day, the Hayward and Middleton by-election came up. We had John Bickley as our candidate there. And I remember about 2 to 3 weeks out from the by-election, Clive Page, the press officer who was assigned to Hayward, just phoned me up saying, "Gawain, just give us £1,000. Just get 1,000. We're broke. We have nothing." All our money had gone to Clacton. We were on 50% in Clacton. We did not need to spend any more money there, as has been seen recently. That was fine. But Carswell would not release a penny. We could not we had no more money. We could not provide any financial support in the Hayward and Middleton election. Now, if we had, I can't remember, but it was less than 200 votes in Hayward, and that would have been UKIP winning 2 by-elections, one against the Tories and one against the Labour on the same day. It would have been devastating. It would have brought Ed Miliband down. there's no way he could have survived that. He wouldn't have gone into the election as the Labour leader. Who knows what would have happened in Labour if Miliband had been taken out at that point. But if we had won that, and we could have done, and Carswell's refusal to let us have a grand switch meant that we didn't have the capacity. And 200 votes. With a get out of the vote campaign and a few more leaflets, you can get 200 votes in a urban constituency. That would have changed. Things would have moved a lot faster. The argument that UKIP Euroscepticism was much more virulent in the working class areas, what later became the Red Wall, would have been recognised far earlier. As it was seen as a flash in the pan, and people forgot about Hayward and Mills. And they remembered Clacton, they remembered the threat to the Tories, but they forgot about this latent threat against Labour. And people only really noticed it first in the referendum itself, and then it died off again, and it was the Red Wall, the Boris Red Wall. Those people who had used UKIP as an entry drug to voting for the Tories.
Sort of holding pen, a gateway drug.
And then voted us for the European elections.
Yes. Split ticket voting, and lots of Tories as well did the same,
Right, but there are people in Cornwall who would vote UKIP in the Euros, Tory in the general, and Lib Dem in the council. People in Cornwall, they look at it and think, what's good for us? And they make their decision based on that. The sort of the David Penn-Halligan old Liberal vote in the southwest is still it still exists.
Sort of non-conformist tradition.
And the same with certain parts of Scotland, certain parts of Wales. And I would say, the far northwest, sort of Westmoreland and that's Cumberland, Westmoreland area, there is that tradition. It is the old Liberal tradition. Of course, most in the old Liberal Party ended up joining us.
Yeah.
When the Liberal Democrats became SDP, the old Liberals joined us. I can think of people like Chris Booker.
Yeah,
who was a great old Liberal, but one of Nigel's great friends, an advisor, a media advisor, and a fantastically fun chap. I mean, let's think of a career. That was the week that was Private Eye, the founding editor of Private Eye, and yet this hardcore Eurosceptic, not what you expect from a lovey.
You mentioned that word fun, and I think that seems to have been a core part of the appeal of UKIP and sort of type. I mean, how did you get that line right between sort of glorious amateurism and amateurism?
I don't think we did get it right. I just think we did it. It wasn't. I think what I mean by that is it wasn't a considered approach.
Okay.
We take our politics deadly seriously. We do not take ourselves deadly seriously, and I think. And I was always, obviously, I had to deal with the lunatic candidates and all the rest of it. And one has to triage. And journalists would come in and tell me X. The floods in Somerset are caused by the government's failure to mention gay marriage in its manifesto. Of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? God obviously reads Tory manifestos.
Glad someone does.
He clearly doesn't, actually, if you look at what's been going on recently. But that sort of stuff would come in, and I would read what they'd said, and I would have to triage it. Is it malice or is it eccentricity? If it's malice, they can be gone. That's it. Not interested in malice. But eccentricity? Well, I'm of the belief that if you look at anybody from these islands for more than 5 minutes, they're slightly odd. All of us have ideas and attitudes and approaches that aren't truly mainstream in all sorts of fields of life. And so I have no problem with what might be termed eccentricity. I have no problem that people have their own point of view. Malice, I cannot have any truck with. But it does mean that sometimes I would defend candidates that other parties might not. Famously, there was the Johnny Rockard, the porn star. Yes, but it was Geronte porn star. But he had told his association it was legal. They were aware. They selected him. He'd done nothing wrong. So I wasn't going to sack him for making a living, even if making a living was what it was. So we're very forgiving. of human frailty, human weakness. I wouldn't want to look at my own history too closely on these matters, so why would I look at somebody else's history too closely on these matters?
I know that Nigel, for instance, during the campaign, talked a lot about how he'd sort of seen off the far right in British politics. True. What was your kind of experience? Did you ever experience sort of people we would consider pretty extreme on the far right trying to join UKIP and the Brexit Party?
There was a time when the BNP had taken over a couple of branches, Bristol, I think Bath, a guy called Andrew Edwards, if I remember right, I may be wrong. Paul Nuttall, famously, on his first day as chairman of UKIP, your first meeting of the board of the NEC. There he is. He's a young lad from Bootle, and he's chairman. And I was just given him this glorious job. And he goes in, and that day, in those days, the BNP they were beating us in council elections. They were winning far more council seats than we were. They were very strong, horribly to say, but they were. And they picked up 2 seats in the MEP seats, and so on and so forth. 1 member of the London Assembly. They were a force. They were a growing lateral force. And poor old Paul sitting there as chairman. Buster Mottram turns up. Now, you may not know who Buster Mottram was.
I've read the name.
But in the 70s, Buster Mottram was the great white... And I say white, please understand. Advised the great white hope of British tennis. He was the failed Tin Henman of his day. But Buster Mottram turns up as a missive from Nick Griffin. And the idea was to divide the country. You can have the South, we can have the North. They can have that working class, the Red Wall. Obviously, this was to let him in at all was not accidental. So he made his pitch. There was a show of hands in the NEC, and those people who supported it, we got rid of. And we were able to cut that cancer out. Because there were senior people in the party, and there was a lot of people saying, look, you've got to talk to these guys. I mean, they're beating you. You've got to do it. If you want Euroscepticism, you're going to have to deal with the devil. Well, no, absolutely no. These guys were authoritarians. They were racist, for fuck's sake. But they actually believed that skin rather than character was what mattered. And this is an absolute antithesis of what Farage believed in, what myself as his press officer believed in, and what the party believed in. It was just not who we were. Though I can see why people on the outside would say your policy on this is similar. You're a skeptic. You want that. You want fewer migrants coming into the country. You want better law and order. You want a decent military. You want good funding for the military. Things of this sort. You want less woke stuff in schools. It wasn't called woke then, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Political correctness, I think, was back
probably. But there is a. Yeah. You could look at that and say they're the same. But what is in the gut and the heart and the mind of those two movements is utterly different. There may be points of similarity when it comes to what the policy said, but not what it meant. And we were and so therefore we dealt with that. Paul dealt with that very effectively, though it must have been quite an eye-opening moment for him. And we went forward. There was famously Nick Griffin went on to Question Time when he was eviscerated, and they fell apart and on each other, and left the stage. And the fact is that though they received a certain percent, I think 7% in the Euros or something like that, where they picked up those seats. Yeah. When people realised there was a party that was patriotic, but was not racist, was not anti-Semitic, in fact was proud of what our country is, not just what it was, then they felt they were being listened to. People voted BNP because they weren't being listened to, and they felt in UKIP they had a voice that was not racist but did listen. And so therefore, yes, as Nigel says, one of his proudest boasts, he drove the far right from British politics. And he did, and we did. And thank goodness for that. So it is a proud boast. Now, of course, you have organisations like they've just produced a report, and there's a picture of me saying, "Wire reform, far right." And I'm there, I'm it. Which rather amused me, rather-ish. But the point being is they are clutching at straws. They may have had a purpose, hope not hate, when you had the rise of the BNP winning council seats, winning seats in PR elections. They did very well in Wales too. But I think Hope Not Hate as it is today is like some of the climate scientists. If they don't keep on saying it, they won't get the money. They are now purely a grift machine. They may have had a purpose. In fact, many years ago, we worked with Hope Not Hate to winkle out the fascists from our own ranks. At that time, when we were ripping them out of our system, there were times where one of the guys in the press office was in touch with them just to double check. We think this guy's dodgy. Is he on your list?
Yeah.
We wouldn't work closely, but we certainly spoke to them because we wanted them out.
Of course, yeah.
So it is quite funny now to watch them. We are the big devil to them today because we're the only devil to them. Because without us, they cease to exist. This sort of operation, without an enemy, there is no purpose in them. And they have mortgages to pay. So they have to create an enemy. And we are it.
Sorry to interrupt the show, but if you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
And talking of purpose, 23rd of June 2016, you're there, right by Nigel, on referendum night. When it came through, particularly the Sunderland result, and you see that famous picture of the lady in the red shirt with cheering on the shoulders, and it all becomes clear. How did you feel that night when you finally achieved what's been, 10, 15 years of your life?
I had only written one press release, and that was, "We will fight on." Wow. Frankly. During that day, the polling was going the wrong way, the betting markets were going... We've discovered the betting markets were skewed by some strange bets, but everything was going the wrong way. Famously, Nigel told Darren McCaffrey a couple of hours beforehand, but Darren kept it quiet until after the results, the polling finished, that he felt that looking at those markets, both the polling and the betting markets, it looked like Remain had shaded it, I think is what he said. And yes, it certainly did look like that. But the first result comes through. It's Newcastle. And it's a Remain win by 1 or 2%.
Yeah, narrow.
And we thought, we were supposed to lose that by 8. We really should have lost that, and yet we did, but that was darn sight closer than we thought. And then Sunderland came through, and it was a big win. And I got a phone call. I was going, I think we might have done it. Two wards in, I thought, 2 divisions in, I thought we might have done it. And I get a call from our guy up in at that count, because it was a joint count. And he said, I can't swear, beep, 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 beep. Absolutely beep, 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 outrageous. And you know how it is. Sunderland always gets first.
Yeah.
It's always the first one. And they were. But the returning officer at Gateshead decided to push them back so they had a Remain result as the first result. And our guys up there were spitting tacks because they changed it. Sunderland didn't get the first count because they were a Leave result. And this returning officer in Gateshead switched it to make a Remain. But even so, that Remain, after those 2, I went with 1.
And was it a good night celebrating?
Well, Aaron Banks was livid. Absolutely livid. We arrived late, and so we missed the floor show. He'd set up a band and all the rest of it at the top of Millbank Tower. We turned up late because we'd been just watching everything. Yeah. And maybe had the drink. And we turned up 20 minutes later. There's Banks standing at the entrance to Millbank Tower going, I guess, where are you? We went up, and of course, there was, it being an enclosed space, there was no smoking upstairs. It wasn't public areas. And no, it was great. And we were having a great wild oater, expecting to lose, remember? Because everybody did expect us to lose. We're not immune to that. And we knew that the Vote.Leave campaign were not having fun. So we thought, again, we take our politics seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. Look, we've had a massive effort, huge work across the country. Why not have a party, win or lose? And then those results started to come through. And yes, famously, a new dawn is breaking and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so, yeah, you try and wrangle that pack. there are a number of journalists there because there wasn't any other party.
Yes, everyone
So
descended.
everybody was at ours.
Yeah.
And so it was absolute mayhem, the event, and there was no point in trying. Absolutely no point in trying to run the show. You could just about make about as much space as, well, less space there is between you and I, Farage, and the media of the world. But it was what it was. But we were able to dominate the airwaves the next day because the other...
Well, they looked like this
vote leave weren't
schoolboys, didn't they? They came out, they gave that statement, we're sorry David Cameron's gone, and they sort of shuffled off, and it was sort of a
and instead we were invited by Freddie Barclay up to the Ritz, had a kippers and champagne brekker, then stumbled back down to
Ferrero Rocher's as an ambassador.
No, that
was later.
That was a birthday party. But we went up at the Ritz. When we got there, there's the Ritz has those wonderful flunkies in uniforms and hats and jackets and stuff, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning or something. Dawn has come up. We've seen the dawn come up and blah, blah, blah. And I said, is Freddie here? He said, you've just missed him. He was skipping down the hall, like the big hall in the Ritz. There was some royal anniversary or something. And the entire gilded ormolu, Napoleon III madness, is the Ritz, had the vast, great, billowing Union Jacks all the way down the roof with gold spandrels and coils and God knows what else. And the idea of this octogenarian billionaire skipping down this hall, surrounded by... I wish I'd seen it. But we all rocked up. The team rocked up. And we had kippers and champagne. Then went back down to College Green, and he gave the press conference. We were up and running. I'm not saying the word running is the right word, but we were up. And nobody else was. And so therefore, it was Farage's victory. Because Boris was nowhere to be seen, because Gove was nowhere to be seen. Dominic Cummings was apparently putting holes in the ceiling, but apart from that, he was nowhere to be seen. But in many ways, I think that was right, even though it was surprising and it could have gone a different way, because that victory was Farage's. Yes, he could not won it on his own. There's no way we'd have won it. Banks, Tice, Farage, and our ramshackle mob would not have won it on our own. No. What we find weird is that the Vote Leave crowd thinks that they could have. They dismiss us below the salt types running around Hartlepool and doing chats with George Galloway and therefore winning Blackburn and winning areas. We wanted to win. And so therefore we were prepared to go anywhere, whereas it felt that Vote Leave didn't want to leave Esher or Cheam. And they didn't want to scare any horses. They wanted to wait until the last minute to allow David Cameron to come back from Brussels with some great piece of paper. And it wasn't going to happen. You had to start fighting. They were going to wait until May for a June referendum. It makes me laugh. We know what happened. And it just makes us laugh. I mean, and now, of course, we see the hand of Mr. Cummings and Mr. Doogie and Mr. Gove, and we see they've not gone away, have they? Not looking at the current leadership of the Tory party. It just seems to be that there is this. The Cummings is back. And I mean, he was always utterly dismissive of us. We were just as dreadful people. We should not have been involved. How dare you get involved in this referendum stuff? There's nary the slightest recognition that no such thing would have happened if it hadn't been for the hard work of Farage and the People's Army, as he would call it. And there was a wonderful, after the Rochester by-election, there's this wonderful Matt cartoon of a couple of gentlemen in tweed suits and moustaches, you know, the languid Matt character sitting in the back of a landing going, it's the People's Army going down to Rochester. And so, we'll get tea when we get there. but that, it was an extraordinary coalition.
And you mentioned there, you said tea about something stronger. I mean, you mentioned your previous answer about, drink and having a good time, etc. I remember Nigel once saying, going to pub tours, said every pub's a parliament.
It is.
And sort of seeing the vote. How important do you think the story of sort of because I know in Brussels there was that sense of, I think, the beer factory and places like meeting like that. How do you think importance of drink and alcohol is important to the story, or do you think that was a sort of image which Nigel sort of adopted?
I remember, I think it's 2013, I was sitting at home and we'd just won 147 county council seats. Okay. That was entertaining. How did we do that? I remember one councillor phoning me up at 7 o'clock in the morning saying, I've got the BBC and the Bournemouth Evening Echo on the lawn. Why? Well, I gather they tell me I've become a county councillor, Dorset County Councillor. Well done. I didn't go to the count. Why not? Well, I didn't do any campaigning. I didn't do any leaflets. I was a paper candidate. And well, you won. Yes. So what do I? Well, are you going to do the job? Are you going to turn up at the county hall? Oh yes, invite them in, give them some tea, talk to them. You've just become a councillor. Well done. But he hadn't put a leaflet out. He hadn't done anything. He'd not even turned up to the count, and he found himself elected. And that sort of something was going on out there. And that morning, we'd had this result, and there was some pundit sitting on the Good Morning Britain sofa and said, but the thing about Farage, he's been very clever. He goes to pubs. He goes to pubs. He looks like he enjoys the company of. And I'm sitting there on the sofa going, no, he just likes a pint. he does like the company of people. This is, alcohol is not. It's not quite the. It's. I've taken more out of it than it's taken out of me, sort of thing. But. It is not the alcohol per se, it is the conviviality around which alcohol plays its part. Unlike most politicians, he and most of the other people in the tribe, as I call people who vote for parties that have once been run by Nigel Farage, this ongoing amorphous group that spreads and grows.
The tribe.
This sort of tribe. The leadership actually likes its members. It's very weird in British politics, where the leadership of a political party actually enjoys the company of its ordinary members, but we do. And one wonderful time around about that period, we had Doncaster. There was a Doncaster when Mark Reckless joined that the conference that Mark Reckless joined.
Of course, yeah.
Not far after that, we happened to be going north and look at the timings, and I just said, "Can you sort out?" It's Monday afternoon. I'd like to go to a working man's club somewhere in the north. And so I just remembered that there was one guy who owned one about 300 yards from Ed Miliband's seat in Doncaster North. So I phoned him up and said, look, do you mind, got somebody, tell your locals, worth coming in on a Monday afternoon, and we were planning to go there for an hour, if that. We were there for 4 hours. 25, 30 of these guys. Now, Doncaster North, it was the last coal mining town in Britain. Whitehaven will not become one, sadly. And so you still had the last deep coal mine there, but it was going. Nigel was a well-known supporter of Thatcher. There was the photograph of him, the Thatcher mug. He was all the rest of it, and yet he goes into this place. I would say a third of them were supporters. 2/3 certainly weren't. But by God, they liked the fact he was prepared to sit down there and talk to them and debate the issue and have a pint and play a game round of darts while you're at it and all the rest of it. And it wasn't inauthentic. And we were trying to get him out for the next 2 hours, but he wouldn't leave because he was enjoying the company and enjoying the debates. And he's never been... If somebody comes up to him and calls him a whole series of abusive epithets, he's not interested. But if somebody comes up and says, Nigel, I think you're wrong on nurses' pay, then he'll talk. How do you ever learn if you only talk to people who say, yes, Nigel, you're wonderful? You can't learn. And he is a deeply liberal man. He wants to hear that debate. He wants to listen. Sadly, the security issue has made it more complicated and more difficult in recent years. But that sort of... So is it the alcohol? No. It's the conviviality with which our society, our culture, has... Alcohol is the tool in which we are convivial. It's not compulsory, but it helps. But it is part of our life, but it is not necessary. Every pub is a pub, as you said. The fact is, you go to a pub and it could be a duke and it could be a dustman, and it doesn't matter. Who's going to get served first? The guy that stood there first. And what's more, the guy that stood there second will pass on the barman,
Yeah.
to the guy, whoever that person is, even if I know him and he's an enemy, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He was there first, and that sort of democracy within an English pub is something we should be massively proud of, and something that the business about the government smoking bans, and now they're talking about minimum prices, and like they did in Scotland, and here, God, the amount of the problems that they are trying to, and it is almost, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would feel that they were trying to close down something that's absolutely vital to our democracy and vital to our ability to exchange ideas and have those things. I'm sure that's not the case, but it certainly feels that way at times. They are pubs. I mean, think of 1984. In the pubs, you could still talk. Even in 1984, in the pubs, people could still talk. It might be shockingly Victory Gin and all the rest of it, but there was a freedom there, even under the 1984 conditions. And that sense of democracy, that sense of clubbability, that sense of conviviality, and the ability to completely disagree with somebody and buy around, that is something that is in many ways Farage's irreducible core. It's a liberty thing. It's like beef and liberty. It is John Barleycorn. That it is something. The idea of a freeborn Englishman. It predates democracy by hundreds of years.
Yes, of course. Yeah. You read like the Magna Carta. You look at the idea of the Norman yoke.
Going back. If you think that the Wat Tyler and the people in the
Peasants' Revolt,
Revolt were carrying a charter of offer,
yes,
which was written more years ahead of the Peasants' Revolt than we are later.
Yes.
And yet these were supposed to be peasants, and they're carrying some Saxon charter. This idea, and there was
this notion of rights, this vague idea of something you can't necessarily.
Liberties more than rights.
Yes.
Yes. Rights are things that are given to you. Liberties are something you hold already.
Uncodified in that sort of British sense, as opposed to
it is something that is inherent to ourselves, not to our society. Rights are things we give ourselves through legal measures. Liberties are things we held, and it doesn't matter. And that sense is. It is interesting. I think it is the case. I may be slightly factually wrong and historically wrong, that almost every single rebellion in English history has been a conservative rebellion.
So a restorationist.
We do not wish to make the world a better place. We want to retain those things we held already, thank you very much, and go away. Give us back our rights, give us back our liberties. We do not reach for a perfect world. We reach for that which we were homely and comfortable with. And that Brexit is that. Brexit is part of that great tradition of not that we want new stuff, we just want the stuff we were happy with, thank you very much. And just get out of our lives and get out of our houses and get out, and the pub is a very strongly is redolent of that. It is part of that tradition, and unsurprisingly, it is somewhere that Farage is comfortable in.
And we have the Leave vote. Then sort of UKIP sort of packs up a bit. 2017 doesn't do very well in the election and sort of goes away into hiding, and then of course re-emerges in 2019 as the Brexit party.
It's a very different thing.
Talk us how that.
I stayed on. I was asked to stay on to act as a sort of steady as she goes.
Well, you were the institutional memory, I think.
Well, still am. but in the sense I was. But I was asked to stay on when Nigel stood down, and then you had Diane James and the 28 days of whatever. And Di's lovely, but that was strange and didn't happen.
The Liz Truss of UKIP.
And then, it's the fact that she wrote in Latidon and things saying, I've done this under duress, or whatever it was. You literally stood for election. How do you say that's under duress? I don't understand. And then Paul Nuttall, and then it came to Gerard, and then Henry Bolton. And the last two, I was standing back, but I'd been asked to do this. But the last two leaders that I was involved in both fell in love with somebody inappropriate. Gerard slightly fell in love with Tommy Robinson, and Henry Bolton fell in love with his model friend. This was, I'm out. I just can't be doing this. And she, given that a couple of some of my children are should we say their surname is Singh, Towler, she made some famous comment about mixed race children and the royal family. I can't defend that.
No.
That is. I was in UKIP because of the constitutional issues. I was in UKIP not because of that. So
No.
And then, of course, the abeyance. And then Nigel was getting more and more concerned about how the government was running Brexit, how this idea that it saw Brexit as a problem to be mitigated rather than an opportunity to be grasped. And as such, it became clearer and clearer over the main renegotiations and that they were going to make an absolute horlicks of it. In fact, they were going to throw it away. And I remember he'd obviously had discussions with other people, but in October 2018, having a drink with him, he said, we're going to have to do something about this. It's a case of I could feel the cupboard in my back room and the armour there all rusty and thinking I'm going to have to go and polish that up again. And then infamously Catherine Blakelock set up the Brexit Party. There's lots and lots of Fisher-Perry parties being created at the time, Homeland and this, that, and the other. And she seemed okay. She spoke, I believe, to Nigel, and he suggested that she employ me as a press officer on an hourly rate. And then I did. We did a couple of weeks later, some Bloomberg or Reuters or something like that, some online Politico maybe, found some comments that she'd made that meant that I had to sack her. And then they found that the Treasurer's comments had also been made that were dodgy, and I had to sack him. And then it was a case of, hold on, there's only two people who can sign my cheques, and I've just fired them both. Oh, fiddlesticks. But at that point, it was getting quite close. The European elections were only a few months ago. And the idea had been is that she was going to hand over to Nigel in about 3 weeks' time. Anyhow, but I had to sack her then rather than then. And so Nigel stepped up 3 weeks earlier. And frankly, though that was not the plan in any way, I think that extra 3 weeks made a big difference to us being able to fight and win the European elections going forward. And having done so, of course, we took Mrs. May out of the picture. We had another one of these silly leadership campaigns. And Boris came in and he made a believable pitch to defend Brexit and get Brexit done. There was the threat of the Corbyn, Joe Swinson and Sturgeon coalition that would have killed Brexit. And so we stood down against the Tories, changing the whole way that election took place. It killed the Lib Dems overnight. They thought they were going to... Joe Swinson was talking about being in number 10 only 2 weeks earlier. It's bats when you think about it, but at the time people didn't think it was bats.
Alternative Prime Minister, that was the name.
Living under Dumbarton Rock. But we did that. We changed the day. I don't think we've ever been even informally recognised the impact that had. I went to the Political Studies Association event after the election, and there they all are, the great panjandrums of British political science and all the rest of it. None of them mentioned this moment. I put my hand up and said, what about this? Oh, yes. I mean, even Ken Clarke said it was the seminal moment of the election. So, come on. And there was, oh, yes, I suppose that was important. You're too right, it was important. Labour were on the offensive. They won a hell of a lot more votes than Starmer did. Labour were on the offensive, but by doing that, we put them on the defensive. They could no longer attack Tory seats. They had to defend their own. The Lib Dems were knocked out. So it was a massive decision, but it was a decision. I mean, in this electoral cycle, Starmer has used that time-old phrase, country before party. He used it a few times. But it's rubbish, isn't it? The only person who's ever actually lived it and done it, and the only party that has ever, in living political history, but maybe in previous years, but I can't think of one, that actually self-immolated on the altar of country before party is the Brexit Party. It destroyed itself in order to achieve a greater and more important aim than its own longevity. And that's Farage to a T. That's how he operates. It doesn't matter. His own personal gain, whatever people might say, and the fact he's earning well, who can begrudge him earning well? He's worked his socks off, as he sees it, for his country. So I do not begrudge him a penny of his success. Quite right too. More people on that side of the argument should have succeeded. It was always entertaining that everybody on the losing side got jobs with big companies, nobody on the winning side got anything.
All honours lists as well, knighthoods.
Oh, yes, the knighthoods, all the rest of it. Not so much as an MB for my lot. But we always knew we'd never be thanked. We were never going to be thanked for this. We'll never be forgiven, we'll never be thanked. But that doesn't mean we weren't right to do it.
But I'd argue that, obviously just recently got elected, but before his election, Nigel would have claimed to be probably the most influential politician outside of Parliament, maybe since Joseph Chamberlain as Mayor of Birmingham in the 1880s.
I've been likening Lee Anderson to a small Nottinghamshire Joseph Chamberlain. Ashfield will follow him. Labour, Tory, Reform, because he is of them and part of it in a very similar way that Birmingham would follow Chamberlain. He has a similar thing to him as Chamberlain. But there was a policy at Number 10 under Cameron that nobody under UKIP will ever get anything because they were trying to stop defections. If you defect to UKIP or Brexit Party or Reform, you will and your wife will never become Lady So-and-so. But that wasn't why we did it. We didn't do it to get letters after our name. That wasn't what it was about. It was about trying to achieve something we believed was absolutely vital for the future existence of our country. You don't need a reward. The reward was 2016. And more recently, at the election day this year, getting into the House, finally breaking through. This is a bigger fight than Brexit ever was. This is not. We couldn't be fighting the fight for the future of our country as we are if we hadn't won the Brexit vote.
And in terms of the present day, talk us through the 5 MPs that Reform currently has in the House of Commons.
I think, Nigel would discuss at length. Richard came from a corporate background. He was very corporate until he took over the party. And he is hugely popular amongst the membership. He changed. I've never met somebody improve so much in such a short period of time with responsibility. He went from being slightly aloof, business type, but on becoming leader, he made a huge effort. He went out. He'd go and see people. He would agree to go to meetings, and there'd only be 10 people there, but he'd travel halfway across the country to do that because he gave his word. And he has grown, and there is a huge amount of affection for Richard in the party for good reason. And he's thoroughly enjoying being an MP. Rupert is, I think, he'd hate me to say so, but I think he's quite ideologically driven. He'd deny ideology whatsoever, but actually I think there's quite a lot of sort of Thatcherite ideology running through his
described
veins.
to me as a Tory MP circa 1983.
Quite possibly, yes. An active and driven one. But so, yes, I think there's far more ideology within him that he realises, would admit to, and would deny fiercely. But I think there is. Lee is, as I say, he has this. He's like a sheep in the Highlands. He's hefted to Ashfield. He loves that town, and they love him back. It's extraordinary. That's the relationship he has. I think that if Ashfield was to disappear beneath the waves and you gave him a safe seat in anywhere else, he'd shrivel up and die. He wouldn't know what to do. He is it, and they love him for it. And he is deeply passionate. He is far more intelligent than people pretend. People like to think he's not.
He's very quick, very witty.
Far, far more than, shall we say, the bien passant would have us believe. They like to think he's a thickie. Don't you? Oh, just because he doesn't have an accent like mine, does that make him stupid? Well, clearly that's what many of the left think, which is classically left-wing thinking for you. So that's them. Then you come to James. Well, you've met James McMurdoch. He's a thunderingly nice guy. I don't know him well. That which I do know of him, I like a lot. You haven't heard much from him, mainly because he's desperately trying to learn. He's taking the job very, very seriously. And he's driven by a level of... this is politics, you're not supposed to own up to this, but a level of goodness. There is such a level of decency and goodness in the man, it's rather embarrassing in politics. But because he didn't get elected because he has sharp shoulders, he doesn't have sharp elders, he didn't have to fight tooth and nail to get to a selection of a safe seat and da-da-da-da-da. He actually is a thunderingly nice guy who is being quite quiet right now because he wants to do a good job and he doesn't want to shout his mouth out about things he doesn't understand. And so he is reading colossally. It's a delight. He is a huge pleasure as a man to know. And I wish him, I think he could be a year and a half hence, when he's really got to grips with what he's doing, I think he could surprise us all. Don't know, but that's my gut. So no, they are all very different characters. But isn't that what we're about?
Well, quite. But if you say, for instance, read like the Michael Crick book on Nigel Farage,
which I haven't,
and there's people, people like have written about it. And say, for instance, you introduced every chapter to the start of a new character, and by the end of it, Nigel's fallen out with them. You look at the UKIP years. There was times when it could be a bit sort of internecine warfare. Obviously, lots of difficult times.
Small parties.
What do you make of
Vociferous?
Yeah, how do you reckon that all five will be able to sort of coexist and keep going as a force as Reform tries to make the jump from being sort of no MPs to what 326?
I think they're all well aware that they need to. If we have ambition, as we do, to be a party of government, and who knows what better than that at the next election, then they need to. And the need to tack in the same direction is very, very important. And that, I think, they all have a very different character, but that, I think, is a good thing. They're complementary, I hope. But having independence of mind brings its own problems. Of course it does. But I think, no, they are well aware of that need, and I think they understand the importance of achieving a massive growth over the next 5 years. I think if we maintain our current momentum, though I noticed the most recent Britain elects or something, we got to 19%, we still had only 8 seats. It's just ridiculous.
First past the post.
Yeah, but there comes a point where what kills you saves you. If you die by the sword, you live by the sword, and right now we're dying. But that may change. But then you look at Scotland and Wales, where we can build significantly under PR, but not just PR. We may even win a couple of seats under the first past system in Wales. Not so much in Scotland, but definitely seats in the PR in Scotland. Then we see a growth. And with that growth nationally, the council elections, Kent, Essex, Lincolnshire, you've got mayoralty in Lincolnshire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, then South Wales. There are areas, in the English counties, forget South Wales there are areas where we are definitely strong, there are others where we're weak. We know that. But it's only by building our strengths, as Nigel will say, as he grits his teeth, taking the Liberal Democratic experience of how to grow at local level. The sky is the limit. Why should these two parties that have let the country down time after time, decade after decade, frankly, have sold our birthright for as many bowls of pottage as they can stick into their private mansions, then why shouldn't a different voice come up and replace them and speak for the people of this country? There's no good reason.
And if you look, for instance, seats like Ashford, you had the Ashford Independents there, you had the Batley Spen by-election, there was the Independents who were, those kind of northern independents sort of, there's a really interesting kind of, I think, things
there
going on
is,
there.
But then you look at Canvey, Castle Point. The Canvey Island Independents have their own thing, but I think, actually, if you're honest, if you look at many of these independent councils around the country and have a quick look back at their history, the amount of former kippers, UKIP councils, the amount of former kippers who are on sitting in councils right now, for Tories, for Independent, for Labour, it's quite extraordinary. There's a lot of the tribe out there, and if we are worthy right now, reform. I think that everybody in the country that is interested in politics, and that's frankly The people who are watching this probably are. But the people in the country who are interested in politics now know what reforms stand for in a sense. They know where our gut is. They know where our heart is. We haven't yet tied our mind to our gut and our heart. That is our job. That is our duty. Because if we wish people to vote for us, not in the 4.1 million, but the 9, 10 million, we have to be worthy of that vote. We were probably worthy of 4 million votes. Absolutely. Because of our gut and our heart. But to get the 9, to get the 10, we have to tie our brain to it. I'm convinced we can, but it hasn't happened yet.
And talking of the future, Gawain, tell me about your own plans. You're going to be very much more on our screens after years, sort of influencing what goes on behind it. Tell us about what your plans are.
I don't really have any. Having fun, breathing.
But being a voice for reform.
Yes, I mean, basically, at the general election, you have BBC, ITV, Sky, Channel 4, Channel 5, LBC, Times, Talk, 3,500 podcasts, all wanting overnight coverage for the election. Anne Widdecombe gave BBC 2 hours. Poor old David Bull, who was standing somewhere in Suffolk, gave a couple of hours, and that was it. We don't have the third-party bodies. And here I am, I'm a third-party body. I see that as a very valuable role, being able to be... what I asked Nigel was for a letter of marque. Dear Queen Elizabeth, I know I'm a pirate, but if I only pirate their ships, is that okay? Yeah, you're on. That's essentially what I can do. I can have that letter of marque. I'm not going to always agree with everything the party does. Of course not. You'd be an idiot. I mean, there was one year that I wrote the UKIP manifesto and I still didn't agree with it all. And I wrote the daft thing. So there was... So no human agrees with everything their party supports. Yeah. You would be bizarre. You'd probably be written by AI if you were that person. So, of course, I'm not always going to agree. But I'm going to agree strongly enough and well enough that I'm a useful figure to be out there on the airwaves batting for the side. And if I completely screw up and get it wrong, they can say, nothing to do with us. So there's a plausible deniability about me in a way that maybe when I was press officer there wasn't. So I think it is a useful... And because of the growth of the party, if we do have 4.1 million votes, if we are seeing us growing in councils, and the regional elections, the Scots Welsh and London, we have Alex Wilson in the London Assembly, having more voices is, I think, legitimate. Because out there, you have more people wishing to hear more of our voices, to be represented, not just by those elected, but by those who are able to talk to people like yourself. And that, I think, is an important part of the biosphere, the political biosphere. They need more people like me.
And just as a final question, Gawain, you've done sort of 20 years doing comms, all sorts of situations. I'm sure you could write many a book about all of this. I just wonder what advice you would give those who now have the job of spinning for Nigel and the Reform Party.
Never lie.
Never lie.
Never, ever lie. If the journalist doesn't ask the right question, don't give them stuff, but don't lie. Because the easiest thing in the world is to not lie. Because the next time you're asked a question, you don't have to worry about what you said last time. If you didn't lie then, you don't lie now, you're not going to trip yourself up. It has always been the case in life and in politics. The cover-up is far worse than the crime. So if you're caught, tell the truth. People will trust you. They will believe you. If you prove yourself to be trustworthy, then if they get something wrong, you can phone them up and say, you got it wrong. They go, fair enough, because they know you're not a liar. That doesn't mean you have to say it. And the other thing, get back to people. If you say, I'll phone you, phone them. It's not basic courtesy. It's remarkable how effective it is. You talk to any journalist. Press officers don't get back to them. Why? That's just rude. And it seems to be counterproductive. So don't lie and always get back to people.
Well, thank you for telling the truth and for giving us so much of your time today on Spectator TV.